Hello and welcome to a special bonus episode of the Reason Roundtable, where we answer even more of your questions. I'm your host, Peter Suderman, and today I am joined by the illustrious Katherine Mangu-Ward, editor of All Things Reason.
Howdy, Peter.
Happy midweek podcast, Katherine. So for this episode, we're going to talk about Senator Mike Lee's plan to sell off some public lands. This was originally part of the big, beautiful bill that's now moving through Congress. And when a roundtable listener wrote in to ask about Mike Lee's plan, we all said we were for it. Sell those lands! In fact, we even published an article on the old Reason.com website, people still read those, saying that Lee's plan didn't go far enough, we ought to be selling more. Well, some of you were not convinced. We got multiple letters pushing back, and we thought we would respond. Now, the first thing to say here is that Mike Lee's proposal is no longer live. He pulled the plan over the weekend, partly because of opposition from Republicans. So it seems like it's not just our listeners who are skeptical, but we still think that this approach to privatizing public land is a good one. Yes, I know privatization is a dirty word to some people, but there are real benefits to private ownership. So, Katherine, let's start with one of our listeners, Colin, who argued that federal land offers a kind of a public freedom. The letter he wrote is long, and I can't read the whole thing, but an important part of it that he writes is, the beauty of federal land in the West is the relative lack of management. You like that, although maybe not for a reason, right? But the relative lack of management, BLM land. So that's, to be clear, Bureau of Land Management land, not Black Lives Matter land.
Yeah.
Right. So BLM land is the only land where you can head out and just camp in a spot that looks good for camping, hike in a spot that looks good for hiking. It's the last vestige of frontier in America. He also adds, without these public lands, things like hunting and fishing wind up being commodities that are sold as curated experiences like they are in England and also Texas. Katherine, you're a libertarian. You edit a libertarian magazine. Do you want America to lose its last vestige of real freedom, right? Of outdoor freedom? Don't you like the idea of the frontier?
This is the argument that I am actually the most sympathetic to is it possible that America is a special case because it is so big and the federal government owns so much land that it cannot really exercise any oversight over those lands, and therefore we paradoxically achieve freedom on federal lands most of all. I get it. I love the vibes of this argument, but I think that what we have seen, not just in the Trump administration, although definitely in the Trump administration, is that that only works as long as politicians do not see a way to gain by exercising control over something they already owned or controlled. So, I'm thinking here of stuff like, it's a lot of libertarians would say, as far as federal spending goes, maybe it's fine to spend money on basic scientific research. And after all, that's as a public good and it's sort of uncontroversial. Fine, until somebody wakes up one morning and says, oh, actually, I could use this as a tool of political punishment for my enemies. I could take away these grants selectively, for example, in the case of Harvard. And I think that is the critique ultimately that my preference for private ownership rather than public ownership rests on for land. It's all well and good. You can hunt freely and camp freely and whatever until you can't because someone figures out how to get political advantage out of that. And I would rather fall back on a private property regime instead of the wills and whims of our politicians.
Okay, let's talk about the second part of Colin's question that I read there, which is without these public lands, things like hunting and fishing wind up as commodities that are sold as curated experiences. Now, I think you like that set of words, selling things as curated experiences. It's kind of a big part of your worldview. But then he goes on to say, like they are in England, where it's the king's land, right? I mean, does that bother you in some way?
I think it's a false comparison. The whole idea of the king's land is like the king owns all the land. The king owns the public lands. And if we have many kings, if America is a land of millions of little kings, as I think it should be, then you can always find a king who's going to have rules on their land that appeal to you, or at least it dramatically increases the chances that you will compared with a single set of rules. But yeah, I don't think paying for access to an experience cheapens the experience. And I don't believe that the people own things. The people aren't a thing. The people is a concept that has gone south many a time, most notably in what will soon be socialist New York.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to have the people's lands. We might have the people's hollow carts and zucchini food desert grocery stores, right? So we got another letter on the same thing from Joel, who similarly said that access to public lands is a huge part of what separates America from Europe. Access to the people's land, not government land. Those are the people's animals to hunt, not the king's, all right? Those are the people's mountains, the people's rivers, and et cetera. It seems like you just don't buy this argument because you don't believe in the people.
I mean, again, I love the vibes of it. It's not surprising. Like, listeners to the Reason Roundtable offer libertarian inflected or like libertarian aesthetic arguments for public land. Love that. Fabulous. But yes, I think that ultimately
they like hunting and camping a lot.
Great, but like you don't need public ownership of anything to do those activities. And the underlying facts, which is that we still have vast tracts of land that will be necessarily under supervised, regardless of who is the sort of technical owner of them. Like, that remains true. And I think that is ultimately what distinguishes us from kind of the old country in a lot of ways. Is there's just a lot of it. And I would be happy to, and I suspect that many people would be happy to. Like, I want to buy our listeners some land.
I think you just want to buy our listeners. I was really hoping you would like just stop there.
I was not going to say that, but like, I would be like, that land's got to be cheap, right? Like, should all of that land go to market, which unfortunately it won't, but should it go to market, like, much of it, which would be totally appropriate for these type of outdoor recreations, will be very, very cheap. I would love to create the like Reason free camping preserve, whatever it is, for our buddies to go out and hang out and kill things and burn fires and, be in touch with the trees or whatever it is that they want to do. I think that's going to happen. I have a high degree of confidence that there will be land, even in a totally private regime, that will function in this very loose and voluntary and kind of unsupervised, unregulated way. And that's, again, because of the physical fact of the United States, which is that we have a lot of it.
So we're definitely going to skip right over the Monty Python reference there. She's got huge
I was just going to let
land.
I was just going to let our listeners enjoy that.
When I said we were going to skip over it, what I meant was we're just going to note that it is there and then move on, because Joel raises one other issue that I want to talk about here, in which he argues that private lands sometimes end up blocking access to public lands that Americans just do have a right to visit, right? Even if you don't think they should exist, as long as they do, you've got a right to visit them. They can't when private parcels make that access impossible. He sort of suggests that this might be an issue with Mike Lee's bill, and I'm just going to answer this part of the question here, because if I understand correctly, the Mike Lee plan, which again is no longer even on the table, but the Mike Lee plan actually just bans that. It bans the sale of right-of-way lands. And it bans actually the sale of a whole bunch of types of lands, including parks and that sort of thing. In part, so like part of what Mike Lee's plan does is it actually restricts what can be sold, so that in the end, there's just not that much, like, people misunderstand how much land the government owns and how much the proposal was trying to sell. It's just a tiny, tiny fraction of the actual public land that is out there, right? And so there's one other concern here that actually goes back to something you said at the beginning about like giving politicians control, because Joel is worrying that the amount of cronyism that can occur from selective land sales of the people's land is very high, right? And you can sort of see how a sale here could produce cronyism. Land is scarce, it's valuable, these sales only happen once, and they are invariably managed by the federal government. Does this concern you in any way, Katherine?
Yeah. Will the federal government screw up in some spectacular and self-motivated way the quite reasonable proposal to sell off some of the huge amount of federal land? Yeah, of course. It's the federal government. This is what they do. And I think that there are a couple ways to kind of hedge against that. One is if they sold more land, actually, that would make the kind of maybe this is a jubilee, maybe this is like a one-time sale competitiveness of it. It would reduce
Does
that.
Does it ever work out when the government has a jubilee for anything?
No, but so one option is they could sell more and they could sell it on like very clear and transparent terms. I think that would help. There is still a risk of cronyism there. The other is that, we could say, well, are we comparing this to the status quo or a perfect imagined condition? Because in the status quo, there's already a lot of cronyism on federal lands. There's already special concessions to who can do any kind of buying or selling on federal land. There's already special concessions and monopolies to certain managers, to certain commercial interests of various kinds. And so I think it's important to note, like, the cronyism is already in the room with us.
So final question, we're going to go back to Colin, who was the first letter writer, and he argues that this is just something that an urbanite might not understand. And fair enough in some ways. All of us on the podcast, me and Matt Welch and Nick Gillespie and Katherine Mangu-Ward, we are all city people to some degree or another. We live in Washington, D.C., New York, and maybe kind of sort of Boston every now and then. We're fundamentally city people, right? So, Katherine, do you think that our lack of lived experience in nature means that maybe we should step back and reconsider and give way to the people who have been out there?
My adult life is definitely a journey into realizing that maybe lived experience is like something that we should take into account. And so I do not want to I do not want to have sort of too much overconfidence on this matter. But I do think in this and in so many other things, I turn to Virginia Postrel, an urbanite herself, to be sure, but also a woman who lived in many places, former Reason editor-in-chief and the author of The Future and Our Enemies, which urges us to be dynamic thinkers, dynamists, rather than static thinkers. I think if we imagine that private ownership of what are now federal lands that are largely unmanaged looks like some kind of horrible Disneyland, but for camping, because that's what we've seen, then I get it. I get it. I would fear that. But I think that we are talking about, in its best form, a kind of fundamental shift that makes space for all the things that people love about the freedom and openness and opportunity of wilderness lands, of kind of uninhabited lands, without really taking into account one way or the other the preferences of urbanists and city dwellers who simply won't be a part of that conversation. And right now we are. Right now, we're voters. And so we are a part of that conversation. It seems to me if you wanted to not have us have a lot of say about what's going to happen with some like rural area or some wilderness area in the American West, take it out of the hands of democracy.
Since this is a bonus episode, here's a bonus Suderman fun fact. I have never been camping. Never slept in a tent. Never done it. Almost did once. Almost came very close. I had some of my close friends from college were like hardcore camping guys, spent their weekends rock climbing and living in tents and eating baked beans. And my roommate and I drove out to meet them, and we couldn't find them. We couldn't find them where they were supposed to be because this was before, iPhones or anything. And so we were just like, well, it's 9 p.m. We don't know where these guys are. They have the tents that we're supposed to be sleeping in. We're not going to sleep in those tents. And we drove back. It's the only time I ever tried camping. Never tried since. And I'm okay with that. So in some ways, this writer has my number. I'm an urban person, and I don't get it in my heart. But as Katherine says, maybe the way to do this is turn this land over to people, let them own it, the people who actually care about it, and that will take people like me out of the equation. All right. Thank you so much for watching. Reminder, the Reason Roundtable comes out every Monday, and we answer one of your questions every single week. If you'd like us to answer your question, send your short, succinct, pithy, and not very long question to podcasts@reason.com. That's podcasts@reason.com. Thank you so much for watching.